invite Dr.Shashi Tharoor for the presidential address.
Bhaumanapata Mukhyamantri, respected Chief Minister Shri Pinarayi Vijayan, Shri C.P. Narayanan, Shri O. Rajagopal, distinguished parliamentarians, Dr. Uma Shivaraman, Srimati Deepti Nair, Shri Jose Matthew, Dr. Jose Kuti, teachers, and above all, the student parliamentarians assembled here today. Great to see you. First of all, happy 1st of Chingam. ഒന്നാം ചിങ്ങം നമ്മളുടെ പലവരും മനസ്സിലൊരു പുതുവർഷമായി കാണുന്നു. It's also Navroz Mubarak for the Parsi community. So we are a country where we have multiple New Years. Enjoy the New Year this year. And congratulations to the Kendriya Vidyalaya Sanghatan Ernakulam region for its outstanding achievements in the last year, which Dr. Sivaraman has just told us about, and also, of course, for having conceived of this remarkable regional parliament here in this astonishing building. I hope you kids have looked around. It's a lovely old town legislative assembly. It used to be used till a few years ago, and now is only unveiled for very special occasions. So the last occasion I was here was when there was a ceremony honoring our then Finance Minister, Mr. K.M. Mani. It's an exquisite place, but of course, it's not modern enough for today's needs, and it has now fallen into disuse. But for a special occasion, there could be no more splendid setting, and I'm delighted to see all of you here in your costumes, in your new personas, ready to debate in the new parliament. I do want to say to each of you, first of all, congratulations on being here and on the trouble you have taken to equip yourselves for the roles that you have to play. It was very pleasant coming a few minutes early and talking to the first row of costumed children. I think there are many more equally attractive costumes in the back rows. I must say you've taken a lot of trouble. And the idea is very good, because you are not here to be a student from Trivandrum or whatever in a particular school. You are here to represent a district and a state far away from Trivandrum, but as part of the great mosaic of the nation's cultures. And I hope you will inhabit your personalities, that you will speak along the lines of what you yourself are incarnating through your costume, your persona, and your role here. Let me echo Dr. Shivaraman in saying that a parliament like this is a building block of Indian democracy. What is democracy? I think you're all familiar with the most famous definition, which is that of Abraham Lincoln, who said democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's an easy enough concept to understand and remember. It's a government of all the people of this country. It is conducted by the people, and the purpose of the government is to serve the interests of the people, so it's for the people. That's the whole concept. But what is the shape of democracy? How does democracy manifest itself in a country of 120 crore people, 1.2 billion people? You cannot consult everybody all the time. You cannot ask people's views on every issue all the time. So you ask them to choose their representatives who will come to an assembly or a parliament, and there they will speak from their best knowledge, their best education, in the interests of the people that they represent. So what we have in India is what is called a representative democracy. It is a democracy in which people called parliamentarians or MLAs, as in the case of Mr. Rajagopal in Kerala, represent a certain section of people, advocate their interests, and speak on their behalf in these august bodies. Now here you are gathered in the shape of a national parliament, and your purpose is to debate current issues. That's what I've been told. I think that's very laudable. I hope you've read your newspapers, but beyond newspapers, that you've kept up with the historical background and the political and economic background behind some of the issues that you intend to raise. You must remember that when you are here in Parliament, you are here to speak with sense, with substance, and you want to persuade others. आप लोग शायद जानते होंगे कि आपको इस संसद के अंदर हिंदी में बोलने का भी पूरा अधिकार है। हमारे सिस्टम में ऐसे है कि आप हिंदी में बोल सकते हैं, अंग्रेजी में बोल सकते हैं और कोई नोटिस नहीं देना पड़ता है। लेकिन अगर आप कोई और भाषा में, जैसे मलयालम में बोलना चाहते हैं, तो आप 24 घंटे पहले स्पीकर को बताना पड़ेगा कि मैं मलयालम में बोलना चाहता हूं, आप ट्रांसलेशन अरेंज कीजिएगा। And you can do that for any Indian language. You can do it for Bangla, you can do it for Odisha, you can do it for Punjabi, but you have to give 24 hours notice. If you don't give 24 hours notice, you can only speak English or Hindi. But English or Hindi, you can speak without notice. That's the system we have in our parliament. And when you do that, you can use both languages, whichever one you're more comfortable in order to persuade the others of the justice of your point of view. There has been a big discussion about whether persuasion really works. Professor Amartya Sen, famous Nobel Prize-winning economist from India, spoke about democracy as an exercise in deliberative discussion, that you have to deliberate on an issue, discuss it, and then come to a conclusion. But one of the flaws of our parliamentary system that I've criticized and written about is, unfortunately, deliberation and discussion don't actually lead to a different conclusion, because in our system, it is the party with the majority of votes that always prevails. You can make the best arguments, you can point out the mistakes in the government's position, you can point out the errors in their draft laws, and still what happens is that you end up very simply having to succumb to the brute majority of the parliamentary government governing party. And that is, I believe, a flaw. I personally prefer the American system, where there is no system of party whip, where people can vote according to their conscience, argue according to what they have to say. I can tell you, recently I had an example. There was a bill introduced in Parliament, very good bill, which actually had been drafted initially by the UPA, was adopted by the BJP, and it's a bill about workers' rights. And it requires that workers should be told in writing by the employer what their rights are. So I said this is a very good idea, but particularly in North India, there are many illiterate workers who cannot read what their rights are in a very formal legal document. So why don't we introduce a small amendment saying they should be informed of their rights orally and in writing? If you tell them orally, these are your rights, you can work so many hours, you are entitled to a lunch break, you get a pension, all these things, you get so much leave, that becomes an exercise in explaining to the worker, and you give it to him orally so he understands it, you give it to her in writing so she has a legally enforceable document, and everyone is happy. So I said, just insert the words orally and I moved an amendment. The entire governing party of the BJP voted against this amendment, and it was not passed. Now I ask you, is that fair? After the vote, many BJP MPs came and told me, we actually agreed with you, but we have a party whip, we have to vote exactly as the party says. So that is a big problem in the parliamentary system. Everything, unfortunately, depends on who has the majority in the party. And even a common sense proposal like mine is not politically controversial. It does not change the intent of the bill. It actually fulfills the intent of the bill. Such a simple proposal was not accepted. So these are some of the examples of challenges, but in principle, the concept of parliamentary democracy is of deliberative discussion. You discuss, you hear the point of view, you accept it, and then you pass a decision. But in India, what we see much more of is another phrase of Amartya Sen's from the title of his famous book, The Argumentative Indian. What we see in Parliament is a lot of arguing. And I'm sure the same is true in our assemblies. We're good at that. Indians love to debate, and I'm hoping that all of you will show that excellent national characteristic in your performance in this Kendra Vidyalaya Parliament. Debate, score points, because the ability to marshal an argument is an extremely important skill, whatever you do in life. Most of you may never become politicians, you may not want to become politicians. But the ability to put your facts together, to analyze them, to draw a conclusion, and to seek to persuade someone else is necessary in every profession. If you become a doctor, you have to explain to a patient why they must follow your guidance and take certain medicines or not eat certain foods. If you become an accountant, you have to explain to a company why the accounts must be done in a certain way and why certain tricks they have been trying are against the law. If you become a housewife, you have to daily persuade your family as to what is the right thing to do so that you can guide the family in the right direction. Whatever you choose to do, there is no area in which these skills are not relevant. So I urge each of you to use an opportunity like this Parliament to master the art for yourselves and also to learn from those who have mastered it better than you, how to assemble facts, how to understand what those facts mean in context, how to synthesize information from various sources, how to come up with your own conclusions. And those conclusions should reflect your beliefs and your values. Your values may be different from her values. It doesn't matter. In a country like ours, with all our diversity, we must have people who have different sets of preferences. Some may say, as say Mr. Narayanan's party believes, that the most important thing is to protect the poor people. Some may say something else. They may say that, for example, economic growth is a larger priority for the nation. Somebody else may say, yes, both are important, but what we need to do is to ensure that as far as our country is concerned, we are safe from terrorism, we are safe from hostile neighbors, whatever it may be. Everyone may have different priorities. It doesn't matter. You must listen to all, see how compellingly they make their argument, and then proceed yourself to do what you consider the right thing. I do want to stress that debate should never be just debate, it should always be informed debate. I believe that's a phrase that Dr. Shivaraman used already in her introductory remarks. If you give your arguments merely because these are your passionately held views, but you don't back them up with accurate information and facts, you're doing yourself a disservice, and as a parliamentarian, you're doing your country a disservice. So I urge you, information is valuable in its own sake. Back up what you're saying with facts and figures. Back up what you're saying with references to the law, to precedent, to what other people have said. Don't just come with a prepared argument that reflects a point of view. Really engage with each other. That's what a parliament should be all about. But there is one thing that I hope you don't do, which we see too much of in our parliament, and that is, please do not disrupt. I don't want to see you all coming to the bell of the house shouting, holding placards, and saying, hi, hi. That would be a great, great shame for the country. Unfortunately, ever since these gentlemen with the cameras came and started televising our parliament, many MPs have convinced themselves that it is far more useful to use parliament like a theatre, as a stage, to demonstrate the intensity of their feelings rather than to conduct the reasoned debate and argument that we all know really matters. I remember in my childhood, there was a famous socialist MP called Raj Narayan. At one occasion when he stood up out of turn, when the speaker had not given him the floor, and started saying something, he was shouting, of course, from the back, the speaker ordered that he leave the house. And when he didn't leave, marshals came. I see you have one marshal. 4 marshals came and lifted him bodily and took him out of the Lok Sabha for disrupting the parliament. Those were the standards we used to have in our country. Today those standards have gone, like standards in so many other fields of our country. Shouting, entering the well of the house, behaving like hooligans has unfortunately become a regular practice, and sadly no party is exempt. When I first came to India, became a member of what became the ruling party after the elections of 2009, I was utterly shocked by the disruption that I saw. I couldn't believe it, and very learned members of the opposition were writing articles explaining the theory that disruption is a legitimate form of parliamentary activity. Today, the same people who took that stand are ministers in this government, and they are saying, what a shame that the opposition is doing what they did. Well, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the golden rule that's taught in all the missionary schools. The golden rule, which comes from the Bible, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule of Indian politics today is do unto others what they have done unto you. So if when one party was in the opposition, they disrupted, when they come to government, you will disrupt. This is the level to which our parliamentary politics has sunk a lot. I'm very pleased to say that fortunately in the last session of Parliament, the monsoon session, we saw practically no disruption. And even though there was some minor disruption by some small parties, the big parties cooperated, and we had a highly productive session with over 100% of the parliamentary allotted time being spent in actually achieving legislative business. So it's important that you use this forum constructively. It is a precious platform. You have all taken a lot of trouble to be elected to this role. You are there to serve your people. Remember Mahatma Gandhi's famous exhortation. Before you do anything, before you take any position, ask yourself, he said, whether what you are going to do or say will make any difference to the humblest, poorest person, a Dalit girl you can imagine in your constituency, and ask if what you're going to say and do will help them in any way, will help improve their lives. If it will, go ahead. If it won't, ask yourself why you're doing it. That was Gandhiji's big advice to those who are going out to represent India in politics. A final thought, just as we have come to the old Legislative Assembly and it has been replaced by the new, so also I should say there is scope for parliamentary practice also to be reformed. Some of you who may have read some of my essays and writings will be aware that I'm not a fan of the parliamentary system. I much prefer the presidential system. I think the parliamentary system is a particularly British perversion in which you elect a legislature to form the executive. I believe the executive and the legislature are two separate functions. I think that this way you are getting legislators who are only interested in becoming members of the government, and if they happen to lose the election, they have no real interest in legislation, and I believe it's bad for the country that we have such a situation. I've explained it in great detail. You can find it in my book, India Shastra, Reflections on India in the 21st Century, or you can Google an article I wrote very similar to the essay in the book in Tehelka magazine called Shall We Call the President? But having said that, and because I believe that we need firm executive action at all levels, not only the president in Delhi, but I want a directly elected governor or chief minister in the states. I want directly elected mayors in our towns. I have actually moved a private member's bill in Parliament requiring that all mayors should be directly elected and given real budgetary power and real authority. So they're not merely glorified chairman of a municipal committee with no power and no authority to do anything useful. I've done this and I want to continue speaking for it. But that's not what I'm here to tell you today, because in the Kendra Vidyalaya, your job is to reflect the system that does exist. And the system that does exist is the parliamentary system based on the British Westminster model. And in this system, the governing party will get its way in most votes, a most unfortunate situation. The opposition will sometimes feel obliged to disrupt, which is an even more unfortunate situation. But in between, very often there are good debates. And many of us have come up with suggestions for reform. One reform that I've suggested, which should be a permanent reform, is that on one day of the week, every week, we should let the opposition set the agenda. Because one of the big worries in Parliament is that you may want to discuss a burning issue for your state, your district, or for the country, but if the government doesn't want to discuss, the speaker is usually elected by the governing party. The speaker is usually told, don't allow that discussion. So we should have a situation, it seems to me, where one reform could be that the opposition sets the agenda for one day. One day is not the whole day, because question hour will take place, 0 hour will take place. All of these things will happen. The Rule 377, other part, but you can have, say, 3-4 hours every day in which only the opposition will set the agenda. That's one possible reform. A second reform could be that private members' bills have to be discussed not just in one day a week, but that at least one private member's bill every week should be brought to the regular floor for discussion, so that we can actually get some of the best ideas from the brains of our MPs and put them to good use. There are many other ideas that are floating around. I don't want to bore you with all of them, because you're going to go back to your schoolrooms and you won't actually be changing the way Parliament works. But I want to say to you that the spirit of reform should be there in your minds even as you speak. Because doing everything merely because it's always been done in a certain way is no way that a country will progress. Some of our great advocates of change in our country were people who were discontented with the way things were always going on, and they worked for change. Here in Thiruvananthapuram, in the mid-19th century, it was impossible for certain lower castes, as they were called, to even walk on certain sides of the road, on certain roads. Thanks to an intrepid reformer, Mahatma Ayyankali, who worked against this, that practice was stopped and the roads were opened to everyone. Till 1936, Dalits could not enter the temple. The main temples of this beautiful temple city. And it took an enlightened Maharaja Travancore, but also on the basis of appeals from many citizens and representatives, to have the temple entry proclamation where everyone was allowed to enter the temple. We've had great reformers like Sri Narayana Guru, Chattambi Swami here in Kerala. This has been a state which has never been prepared to accept that something should be done merely because it's always been that way. Do you know that Travancore, where you are sitting today, is the first place in the entire world to decree free and compulsory education for both boys and girls? Nowhere in the world, not even in the Western world, was there free and compulsory education for girls. There was in some places for boys. But in 1819, we had Rani Gauri Parvati Bai here in this Travancore kingdom, who actually passed a law and declared a proclamation that all boys and girls will get full primary education up to and including class 5 for free and compulsory. She wanted to force parents who thought that girls did not deserve to go to school, she wanted to force them that they'd be violating the law if they didn't send their daughters to school. So this kind of reform spirit is the spirit of Travancore and of Kerala. And today, on the 1st of Chingam, the Malayalam New Year, I urge you all to approach your diligence, your task with diligence and with reform spirit, that you should say, as you speak for your causes, never use the argument, this is how it should be because it's always been like this. That is not the Kerala attitude. That is not the Indian democratic attitude. If we are the largest democracy in the world, we must be prepared to work for change. We must be prepared to work for transformation. So those are my brief words of wisdom to all of you. I really wish you an absolutely wonderful session. I hope it turns out to be educative and instructive. I hope that your costumes will be a reminder to you of who you are, the interests of your state, so that the Punjabi gentleman there will have to worry about agriculture, will have to worry about the drug menace, will have to worry about security issues from neighboring Pakistan, will have to worry about river waters. Punjab is the land of the 5 rivers. And perhaps if there is a representative here from Kashmir, they'll have in their minds the troubles that are going on today. A representative from Kerala knows what the contemporary politics of this state are, because you hear it around you. Speak in the role that you have been given, but speak always with the larger idea of India in your mind. India has begun the 70th year of its independence. We will have a great deal to look back upon, and I want to end with this final thought. In 1947, when the British left, they left us in terrible circumstances. I've written a book which is coming out in November called a long darkness, the British Empire in India, to remind people of all the horrors that were inflicted upon this country. Even in the 47 years before 1947, the rate of growth in India was 0.8% under the British. Mortality rate was high. Life expectancy was only 27. Literacy rate was merely 17%, and when it came to women, only 8% of our women could read and write. Can you imagine? 1 out of 12 and a half women knew how to read and write. That must have been the half one. That was the kind of country that we were left by the British. So while we may all have many complaints and dissatisfactions, we may be impatient to see more change and more progress, we should always appreciate how far we have come in these 70 years. How that 0.8% has now gone to 7.3% of growth. How the life expectancy instead of 27 is now 72. How the literacy rate has also gone from 17 to 72%. Though even there is still a gender gap because women are only 66%. How in every respect, child mortality, maternal mortality, number of hospitals, number of doctors, number of engineers, everything has improved. We're not a perfect country. We have a long way to go and a lot of change to come about. But celebrate what we have done and make your contribution to making India a better place for all of us. Congratulations, all the very best, and Jai Hind.
അതിഥിയും അമരക്കാരനുമായി എത്തിച്ചേർന്നു.